First look at Swift for most of you. This controller is going to control that user interface. That's why we call it the view controller or the controller. It controls the user interface. And that means it's going to do things that are specific to how this user interface, a calculator's user interface, works. So when we press the digit buttons, it's going to have to update the display. When we press times, it's going to have to do some multiplication and then put the result in the display. So it's controlling the display. Okay, so we'll get back to this code in a moment, but we're going to start by building our user interface. And by the way, your user interface, you can see I have a low resolution screen here, so my UI doesn't even really fit in the space here. You'll probably have maybe a little higher resolution screen than I do. But if you don't, you can zoom in and out. I'm just right-clicking. If you right-click on the background area here, you can zoom in and out. You can also do it by double-clicking. So if I double-click on this, it zooms it to normal. If I double-click on the background, it zooms out. So that way I can see my whole UI. Now when we build a complicated app, we're going to have a whole bunch of these little square areas. We call these scenes. And a scene represents kind of a phone screen full of information. Okay? And as you've used many iOS applications, you know that you transition from one screen to another as the user goes through the app. And that's how you're going to build your apps as well. And this storyboard is eventually going to have a big map showing all the transitions between all those scenes. Okay, so this storyboard is going to get big for big apps. You're going to get to see your whole application, which is kind of cool. So we're going to start small, though, just this one little screen right here, which is going to be our calculator. So let's start building our calculator with its display. So I want to make a display. So how do I do that? Well, that brings us to the right side, the right-hand side here, this whole right side. This is called the utilities area. You can see that it's got a bottom and a top, right? We want to go into the bottom, and on the third tab right here, which is called the object library, you'll see that there's tons and tons of objects in here, okay? Dozens of these things, and we're going to get to a lot of these by the end of the quarter. But these are the things you build your user interface out of. So kind of towards the top, not all the way at the top, but towards the top, you'll start seeing things like buttons and text fields and things like that. Well, this is what we need, obviously, to build our display here is some sort of text field. And there's a couple of them here. This one called label is static text, you see? And this one, text field, is editable text. In other words, you could touch on this one, and the little keyboard would slide up from the bottom, and you could type in it. So the calculator, you can't really touch on the screen and start typing, so we want this static text. So I'm just going to pick this up with the mouse and drag it out. Now, when I drag it out into my UI, you're going to see a lot of little blue dashed lines appearing. You see these? These are helping me put this in the right place. So I could put it right in the center, for example, of my view. I could put it up in a corner up here, which is what I'm going to do. Okay? You always want your things that you put in your UI, as much as humanly possible, to be on one of these dashed blue lines. And you'll understand why in a couple weeks when we start talking about auto layout. I'm going to do a little auto layout right here just to kind of give you a feel for it. But those dashed blue lines are going to be your best friend when it comes to building your user interface, and you'll quickly see why that is. Once you drag something out like this, these little things around it that show it's selected, right? They also are little resize handles, so you can grab them and resize them. When you resize, it also puts those dashed blue lines out there, okay? So you definitely want to, even when you're resizing, get those things lining up. You can also manipulate it directly, just double click on it. Like a calculator probably doesn't want to come up. This is going to be the initial state of this. It doesn't want to come up saying label. It probably wants 0. Something like that in its display. There's also things you want to set about this, though, or anything you drag in your UI, that you just can't direct manipulate. And that's what the top half of this utilities windows is for. Okay, so if you look at the top half here, there's a bunch of tabs across the top, including something like this, the size inspector for setting the size of this thing. And this tab right here, really important, this is the attributes inspector. And this is an object-oriented inspector. Depending on what you have selected, you'll have different user interface here in the top. And this lets you edit attributes about what's selected. So for example, a calculator, the 0 doesn't really want to be on the left, right? Calculators, the numbers are on the right, and they kind of grow out from the right. And so we can easily fix that with this alignment thing right here. So I'm going to click this, and you see the 0 moves over to the right. And maybe I want a bigger font. You see the font right here. I can click on this, pick different fonts. I'm going to just move it up to like 32 point. It's a nice big font. You can notice it kind of cuts off. I made it so big that it's too small, so I can always just resize this larger to make that fit. So this is how we build our user interface. It's very direct manipulation and very object-oriented, as you'll start to see when we have different kinds of objects. So let's actually run this application. Okay, we haven't built any calculator-ness about it, but we have this one field. Let's run it and see what it looks like. So how do you run things? Well, you see right here where it says iPhone 6. This actually is a selector that lets you say where you want to run your application. So you can see you can run it on an iOS device if you have one connected. I don't have one connected currently, but you can do that. And we'll talk in a Friday section, probably in a week or two, about how to get your devices hooked up. But also there's these plethora of simulators here. iPhone 6, 6 Plus, iPhone 5, iPhone 4S, iPad Airs. And you can pick one of these to run on, and it'll actually simulate that device right here on your computer. So I'm going to run on the iPhone 6. Okay, I'm just going to hit play. You see this play button right here? That's how you simulate, so play. Now it's launching a simulator. It's a separate process, and it's going to run our app in there, and there it is. Now, you might say, what, big white square, that's not so good. And the reason this is so big is because the iPhone 6 has a very high resolution display on it, okay, the Retina display, and it's way higher resolution than my computer. Okay, so I actually have to scroll around. See, there's the top of it. Scroll up and down to get to it all. Luckily, if you go to Window, I'm in this simulator now, the iOS simulator. If you go to Window and Scale, you can scale it down to be smaller, and then it'll fit. Okay, so if you have a low resolution screen, you're definitely going to want to use Window Scale. Command 3 right there is another way to do it. Okay, so here's our UI, but it doesn't look too good. Okay, because where's this? We put this 0 in there, and it just never showed up. What did we do wrong? Well, we didn't really do anything wrong, and that 0 is actually there. It's just here. Let me line up these UIs. This is not necessarily exactly the same scale, but it's approximately the same scale. You can see that the 0 is actually off screen. Okay, so it's there, but you just can't see it because it's over here off the screen. Okay, and that's a problem, but that's a problem we can fix. So let's go fix that problem. Why is that thing off screen? Well, look at this UI right here, okay? What shape is it? It's square, okay? No iOS device is square. There's not a single square iOS device in the world. They're all, you know, tall and thin, or if you turn them sideways, then they're long and short, or even like an iPad. You know, the aspect ratio on an iPad is slightly different than an iPhone. So they're all slightly different, but none of them are square. So why do we design our UI in a square? Because the way you design iOS interfaces, you design them in this square, and you give everything inside the square rules, called constraints, about what happens to them when they get squished down, either squished down vertically, squished down horizontally, depending on what kind of device they're getting put on. Okay? So you put these rules in there. So what does it look like to put these rules in? Well, again, it's all direct manipulation. So I'm going to give some rules to this label right here to make it so that it knows what to do when this square gets squished down in any direction for any device. So what do I want the rules to be? Well, I always want this thing to use the whole width. However much width I have, I want it all. So I'm going to pin this right edge to this edge. Okay, I'm going to make it so those always are pinned to each other. And I do that with the control key. I've turned on sticky keys, so you can see down in the lower left here, it's showing the modifier keys I'm using. So right now I'm holding down control. And I'm going to control drag from the right edge of this to the container it's in. See how it's showing me what I'm dragged to? So when I drag to this container, it puts a menu up and says, oh, okay, you want some rule between that label's right edge and this thing's edge. What do you want it to be? Well, I can do a lot of things here. I could center this label vertically in this container, up, you know, vertical up and down. I definitely don't want that. I want my label at the top, so I don't want that. I could make it the equal width, so I could make this label the same width as the container. I don't want that either, because I want this little margin there, right? But look at the top one, trailing space to container margin. This lets me pin the trailing space after my label to the margin of the container. So that's the one I want. So I'm going to click on this, and it does it. Now, see all these yellow and orange lines that appeared when I did that? That's because the system's like, okay, you've started telling me the rules for this label, but you haven't told me enough rules. I don't know what to do with this thing. So now it's showing you all the places where it's like the system's not sure what to do now when this thing gets squished. Before it was like, okay, well you weren't telling me anything, so I'm not going to do anything. But now you're starting to tell me. So what do I do? So we have to fully specify both what happens horizontally and vertically to this thing. So we've only just started here. So let's pin this edge also, because we want this edge to stay on this side. So I'm going to hold down Control and drag. And now I'm going to pin the leading space to the container margin. Okay, boom, that did that. Still have orange going on here. That's because I haven't specified anything about the vertical position of this label. So I'm going to pin the top to the top. So hold Control again, drag up here, and this is now top space. Notice that it realizes where I am dragging to and from, right? So they can give me options that make sense, like top space to layout guide here. So I'm going to do that. So now I'm starting to get blue lines. You see these lines? I hope you can see that there. They're solid blue, not orange or red. Okay, that's because they're okay. We are okay horizontally here, but we still have a problem vertically. Now, I'm not sure exactly what the problem is vertically, because I really don't want the bottom of this. I just want it to hang out wherever it wants to hang out based on the size of my font or whatever. So I don't really want to specify anything here. So why is this orange, and how do I get rid of this? Well, anytime you have orange, when you're doing this layout stuff and you don't know what to do, you want to go down to this button right here. Okay, this is the document outline. And when you click this, the little thing will slide out, a little shelf here. And this is an outline view of everything that's in your UI, okay? And they're linked. So if I click the background, nothing is selected, then the background, the view, is what's selected here. But if I click this L0, which means a label with 0 in it, look, it selected my 0 label. And vice versa, if I click on this here, it selected over here. So this is this same thing in an outline mode. This is really nice to have. Sometimes you have views that are overlapping and they're kind of in each other's way. You can always go here to select the one you want, okay? And you can control drag to these over here too. It's just as much control draggable as some of these other things. But we'll talk about top layout guide, bottom layout guide a little later. But what I really want you to focus on is this little yellow circle up here. Okay, anytime you got yellow and orange problems with this auto layout business, you're going to get this little yellow circle appearing in your document outline. And if you click it, it'll slide in a list of all the problems. And so here, I'll highlight over this. This is where all the orange and yellow is. It's saying the label with the 0 in it expected the height to be 39, but the actual height is 57. Well, that's because after I set this font, I just dragged this down a little bit to make space, right? I didn't know it was supposed to be 39. I just dragged down. And so it's saying that's wrong. Now, I could just try drag it back up and meet this dashed line. This dashed line, by the way, is where it's kind of saying this is really where this thing wants to be, but the solid lines are where it actually is. So I could kind of drag it up to there, but I could be off by a pixel or something else. A much more reliable way is to click this little yellow triangle, okay? So I'm gonna click this yellow triangle. It's gonna bring up this pop-up window, and there's 3 ways to fix the problems, okay? One way, update constraints, this middle way right here. That's a way that says, hey, I want this label to be right where it is. So just make some constraints, make it up, make it happen, and it'll put some wacky